While the sunlight was entering the hallway through the window, Tudor clenched his fists and began to look at the floor in silence. Sancho crossed his arms without making a move. Piggy and Vicar remained silent, creating tension in the atmosphere. Granol started staring at them with an arrogant gaze and with a smile mentioned that they said you could know a person's level by looking at the people they hung out with, and by looking at his plebeian friends he could see Tudor's level. Despite having his mind full of rage, Tudor tried to stay calm, and with a piercing look asked if he had forgotten that he had taught him that there was no distinction between nobles and plebeians in the academy. The Granol extended his hand to the side and mocked him by asking what he was doing, frowning, revealing that he was just someone who had been at the scene of the night bloodhound incident, but had not been able to do anything. Sancho's eyes, as he stood with his arms crossed, filled with confusion, not knowing how this guy knew this. Tudor's expression changed from rage to surprise. With a serene look, he responded that he hadn't been able to do anything because he was sleeping at that moment. The eyes of Granol's subordinates filled with fury, and they began putting on masks. He placed his hand over his chest, and his body started releasing a toxic gas. He stared intently at Tudor and, with an arrogant smile, said that losers always had excuses. If he had been there, he would have caught the night bloodhound. In the blink of an eye, his body began to release a large amount of toxic gas, which started spreading throughout the room. Seeing this, Piggy's eyes filled with fear since he didn't know what was happening. Tudor, who was standing nearby, began observing Granol and couldn't help but go on alert without knowing what this guy was planning to do. He put his arm in front of his mouth and his eyes filled with fear and surprise, asking if Granol intended to show his skills inside the academy. Vicar, who was behind, began to observe the gas, and it didn't take long for him to realize that it was paralyzing poison. At that moment, the small spider emerged from our boy's clothes and her attention fixed on the gas. Upon feeling her touch, Vicar couldn't help but fall into confusion without knowing what was happening. In the blink of an eye, the entire room filled with gas. Granol, whose eyes were full of rage, put his hand in front of his face and with a piercing gaze revealed that he was only playing. He was merely demonstrating the difference in level between them and him. His subordinates, who were wearing masks and standing behind him, began to show a piercing gaze, ready to attack. Granol wanted them to feel the difference in status and despair. Piggy started covering his mouth with both hands. Sancho began pinching his nose with his finger, and his attention fixed on Granol without knowing what this guy was planning to do. Tudor's eyes, who had his arm in front of his face, filled with worry, making him clench his teeth tightly, realizing that this was not good. The little spider, who was hungry, opened her mouth and prepared to eat. At that moment, she began to devour the paralyzing poison that was in the room. Our boy was in shock without knowing what was happening. The little spider was devouring the gas so quickly that Tudor closed his eyes. Vicar started watching her with a surprised expression. He couldn't believe that Madamai's offspring was rapidly inhaling the poisonous mist. To prevent her from being discovered by the others, Vicar grabbed her with his hand, and he soon realized that her staple food was eating poison. Tudor, who thought he was going to die, opened his eyes, and his gaze filled with surprise and confusion upon seeing what was happening. In the blink of an eye, the little spider devoured all the poisonous mist. Now the room looked as if nothing had happened. Tudor, Sancho, and Piggy were somewhat confused, not knowing what had just occurred. Tudor had been scared for no reason, but luckily Granol also had common sense. Granol's subordinates were in shock and couldn't help but feel fear upon seeing that the poisonous mist had disappeared without a trace. Granol's eyes filled with surprise and confusion. He could not avoid going into shock and starting to sweat without knowing what had just happened. Vicar hid the little spider back inside his clothes, and she started burping, causing a bit of venom to come out through our boy's collar. He quickly looked away to avoid drawing attention. Granol's gaze fixed on him. He felt as if all the fog had been absorbed by our boy. He didn't know if he had seen wrong. He crossed his arms, closed his eyes, and a smile spread across his face. He had shown a generosity deeper than the abyss, and it was a waste of poison to use it on idiots from the ice core who were full of muscles instead of brains. Tudor began to walk toward him, and with a serene expression explained that he knew that he had been looking down on them for a long time. He approached, clenched his fist tightly, and began to stare him straight in the eyes with a piercing gaze, asking if he didn't want to fight under fair conditions. Granol's eyes filled with seriousness. He returned the gaze and began to think silently. With a gaze full of rage, Tudor mentioned that the midterm team competition was about to take place, and the team with the lowest score would have to run a lap around the academy naked. The Granol remained calm and accepted with a serene expression. His eyes filled with excitement as he turned around, started waving goodbye to them, and with an arrogant smile accepted the bet, because he believed it would be good training to see how they were going to lose. While little by little he was moving away, Tudor stayed watching in silence, eagerly waiting for the day of the competition. Piggy, whose mind was full of guilt, approached, started looking at the ground, and with a sad gaze asked for forgiveness. Upon hearing this, Tudor came out of his trance and with a calm expression explained that everything had gone well since he was going to crush Granol's ego. Piggy's eyes filled with tears. He was just a low-ranking expert, so he didn't know if he would be of any help during the competition. With a kind smile, Tudor placed his hand on Piggy's shoulder and told him not to worry since he was somewhat intelligent and had excellent observation skills. Everyone started walking down the hallway, and along the way, Tudor extended his hand and with a cheerful smile explained that since they were going to be 4 in the midterm team competition, Sancho and he would be the vanguard, Piggy would be the middle commander, and Vikir, who specialized in bows, would take care of the rear guard. Therefore, achieving a high score was going to be a piece of cake. Upon hearing this, Piggy's eyes filled with excitement, bringing a smile to his face. Sancho began observing Piggy, and upon seeing his smile, he couldn't help but feel inner peace. Meanwhile, on the other side, our boy remained silent. They were not willing to lose against someone like Granol. Piggy clenched his fists and couldn't help but smile. His eyes were full of determination and admiration, but Vikir broke his smile. He raised his hand and with a cold expression explained that he already had a friend with whom he had decided to form a team for the team competition, so he was not going to be part of their team. Tudor went into shock, turned around, and with a surprised expression started asking why. Vikir began pointing towards the ceiling with his finger and repeated again that he had a friend with whom he had decided to form a team. Piggy panicked, extended his hands to the sides, and with a confused gaze asked if Vikir couldn't reject him, to which he replied that promises were important. Everyone got mad at Vikir since they wanted him to pay attention to the situation. If they lost, they would have to run naked through the academy. Vikir showed no emotion, looked away, and said nothing. A week later, it was a wonderful day. The sun was shining high in the sky. All the students of the academy went to the stadium. The eyes of the students were full of excitement, and everyone was eager for the competition to begin. Several students emerged from the door. It was Tudor's team. There was a man carrying a shield, a woman carrying a staff, and another man carrying a crossbow. Everyone started cheering for her, since she was the pride of the imperial capital. Tudor's eyes were full of emotion and seriousness once she entered the field. A blue barrier appeared around her body. The partial exams of Colosio Academy were open to the public. There were a total of 3 subjects for the partial exam. The first team test that served to evaluate defense. The second individual test to evaluate offensive strength. And lastly, there was the written test where every year many students struggled to pass. In the defense test that was going to take place today, a dungeon was created in the stadium using holographic magic. in which they were going to have to fight against fictional monsters created by applying holographic magic to a clay golem. The magic began to take effect, and in the blink of an eye, giant ants made of clay emerged from the ground. The man carrying the giant shield was the team's tank. He stood at the front to block attacks. Dollars positioned herself behind him, closed her eyes, extended her hands, and began using her power. The boy carrying a crossbow prepared to attack, while the girl holding the magic staff summoned a fireball and got ready for long-range combat. The magic shield was going to cover the entire body of the students, and when they received a certain amount of impacts, the damage taken would be displayed on a distant panel. The students formed a team of 4 to defend themselves from the wave of monsters approaching, and the test performance was measured by their contribution and how long they managed to resist. The fight began, and Dollars summoned a large magic circle behind them. The HP points granted to the students were deducted each time they were hit by monsters, and when their HP points reached 0, the test would automatically end. There were 3 rounds, 20 minutes each. If one survived a total of 60 minutes, they would achieve a perfect score. The audience began to cheer her team with excitement, and the best grade of this term had come from the third-year students, more precisely from the team of the school president, Dollars, who had managed to endure for 58 minutes, achieving the best record among the third-year students. Her team members were sitting and exhausted. Dollars was the only one still standing, but had all her clothes full of scratches. With a tired gaze, she began to pant heavily. Somewhere else was Piggy, who was writing something in a notebook with a surprised expression. He realized that the fourth-year students were not taking the test. He was sure that Dollar Senior's team would be the best team and would achieve the highest score on the midterm test. Behind him was Sancho, who had his arms crossed and carried an axe on his back. Next to him was Tudor, who carried a spear. Piggy, who was jotting down notes in the notebook, mentioned that generally third-year students reach the third round and second-year students reach the second round, so they, as first years, if they could last 20 minutes, would be at the top. With a smile, Tudor replied that they couldn't be satisfied with that. He began observing the competition with a cheerful expression and explained that if they wanted to crush Granule's ego, they needed to at least make it halfway through the second round. Sancho also started enjoying the competition with a smile. At that moment, someone with their hand on their hip appeared and explained that she was going to be with them, so it wouldn't be a problem anymore. Upon hearing this, their attention turned to her. It was Bianca, who carried a bow as her weapon. She began walking toward them, and, while touching her hair with her hand, asked Tudor to make sure he played his role well so the monsters wouldn't focus on her. With a confident smile, she revealed that she was going to hunt all the monsters. Tudor's eyes filled with insecurity. He didn't know whether to trust her. With a calm expression, he mentioned that teamwork wasn't about being a princess and having 3 servants. He would have to strip if he lost, so he asked her to take it seriously. A smile appeared on her face as she mocked him by saying that she didn't want to see him naked either, since her eyes would rot. She then urged him to give his best effort. Sancho kept calm and did not lose his composure. With a serious expression, he explained that they were going to have to fight against the enemy on the battlefield. Tudor and Bianca turned their backs on each other. Piggy's eyes filled with confusion, and it didn't take him long to realize that Tudor and Bianca were secretly on bad terms. His attention fixed on the sky and his mind filled with many questions, not knowing why Vicar had gone to another team. Somewhere else in the stadium was our boy. With a serious look, he mentioned again that he didn't like people noticing him. He carried a bow on his back. Vicar crossed his arms and with a serious expression explained that things had happened and he had received some attention, so it would be bad if he got more than this. So, he gave permission to the other members of his team to go crazy so that he wouldn't have to do anything. In front of him were 3 boys with blonde hair. They were the triplets, who promised to protect Vikar so that he wouldn't have to do anything. The eyes of Highborough, Middleborough, and Lowborough were full of excitement, and a smile spread across their faces. Their attention was fixed on Vikar, and they couldn't help but blush. It was the first mission their master had given them, so they had to do it well. While Tudor, Sancho, and Piggy were waiting bored to death, someone wearing white boots appeared and caught their attention. They knew that Tudor had abandoned his plebeian friend and taken Bianca from the Usher family, being a natural decision to make in order to win. Granwell was a second-year student. With a confident smile, he was sure it would be impossible for them to win. But he was also a little annoyed since they had also recruited someone new to the team. Someone with white hair asked him if he could stop smiling sinisterly. Somewhat annoyed, Granwell turned around and, with an angry expression, mentioned that she should be grateful for being accepted, calling her a commoner. It was Sinclair? She clenched her fist and with a surprised gaze responded that she didn't feel like it, but as teammates they were going to work hard to improve each other's grades. She put her hand on her chin and couldn't properly say Granwell's name, something that made him angry. She started looking around, not knowing where Vikar was. Granwell's subordinates began to observe her and thought she was someone very strange. His eyes were full of confidence. He firmly believed that the first place among the first-year students belonged to them. They were Team 69. Vikar's team was Team 108. Highborough, Middleborough, and Lowborough carried swords as weapons while our boy carried a bow. Tudor's team was Team 109. While Bianca was waving at the audience with her hand, Tudor started cracking his fingers and with a confident smile decided it was time to begin. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part,